Adrian Russo was the kind of man who never wore a watch. To him, time wasn't something to measure, but something to float in. At 34, he had the aura of a boyish dreamer, messy brown curls that always looked like he'd just stepped off a boat, and hazel eyes that seemed permanently amused by the world. He made his living as a freelance photographer, hopping between fashion gigs and travel magazines, always capturing fleeting beauty, never staying still for long. His apartment was perched above a cozy jazz bar in downtown Verona, more a gallery of postcards, vintage cameras, and half-empty travel suitcases than a true home. He had grown up in a liberal artist household where rules were few and curiosity was king. His mother, a ceramicist, taught him to mold clay without fear of imperfection. His father, a poet, once told him that love should feel like a sunset, beautiful, but never clutched too tightly. Maybe that was why Adrian had never believed in permanence. To him, freedom was the heartbeat of life. Then came Clara. She was unlike anyone he had ever met. 32, composed yet passionate, with coffee-colored eyes and a voice like velvet in the rain. Clara was an urban planner with a reputation for transforming derelict neighborhoods into thriving communities. Where Adrian saw snapshots, Clara saw blueprints. Where he admired the chaos of a city, she longed to rebuild its bones. She had been raised in a family where dinner was served at 6 sharp and future plans were charted like constellations. Their paths crossed at an art gallery opening. Adrian had been shooting the event, and Clara had been invited by a client. It was her laughter that caught his lens first, then her gaze. Their worlds collided in color. Walks turned into late-night wine on the terrace. Conversations about politics and art stretched into 2 a.m. debates about whether love should be felt or built. Adrian introduced Clara to his world of spontaneity, last-minute road trips, dinners on the fire escape, jazz records spinning at sunrise. She taught him the quiet beauty of structure, saving receipts, mapping retirement, scheduling doctor visits. The two fell in love somewhere between those contradictions. Adrian, ever allergic to structure, found Clara's vision of life charming. At first, their relationship bloomed in seasons. Summer brought weekends at the coast, Clara's curls wild from the salt air, Adrian snapping candid shots of her reading in the sand. Autumn had them nesting, her books overtaking his coffee table, her morning routine grounding his chaos. Even winter didn't feel too cold with her, her soups, her mittens, the way she layered warmth into the silence. But by spring, the cracks began to whisper through. Clara wanted to move in. It wasn't an ultimatum. She framed it with love and gentle reasoning. "We practically live together already," she'd said one morning, sipping coffee on his windowsill. "Why not make it official?" Her eyes had been full of hope. A simple, quiet kind of hope. Adrian had smiled, kissed her knuckles, and responded with his classic phrase, "We have time." Clara didn't push. Not then. But something in her smile had flickered. Over the next year, the phrase became a wall. Every discussion about the future, joint finances, possibly adopting a dog, taking on a long-term lease, was met with Adrian's charming deflections. "Why stress about forever when we're perfect now?" he'd say. Or, "Let's just enjoy the ride." For Adrian, love was about the present, the heartbeat, the breath, the light in a room. But for Clara, love was a foundation. Something to build and grow. Friends noticed it first. At dinner parties, Clara would glance toward Adrian when someone asked if they planned to buy a home, and he'd joke about living in a van someday. Her eyes would drop, then her fork. She didn't laugh as easily after that. One Sunday evening, Clara's best friend Nia pulled her aside. "He's beautiful," Nia whispered, as Adrian poured wine in the kitchen. "But are you building a life together, or just playing house in his?" Clara didn't respond. Not because she didn't have an answer, but because she was afraid she already knew it. The breaking point came on a Wednesday. Clara had just landed her firm's biggest contract, a citywide revitalization project. She had called Adrian, breathless with joy, and asked him to meet her for dinner to celebrate. He forgot. He had taken a spontaneous overnight train with a friend to photograph fog in the Dolomites. When he got back 2 days later, he texted her a picture of the mountains with the caption, "They reminded me of you." Clara stared at the photo. It was beautiful, yes. But it was also hollow. He had missed her moment. Again. That Friday, she showed up at his apartment holding a small box. "What's that?" Adrian asked, eyes crinkled in his usual half-smile. "My key," she said, placing it on the counter. His face fell. "Clara." "I love you," she interrupted gently. "But I can't keep putting all my bricks into a house you never planned to build." He reached for her hand, but she stepped back. "This isn't punishment," she said, her voice breaking. "It's a blueprint I can't keep drawing alone." She left with a goodbye kiss, soft, lingering, like the ending note of a favorite song. For weeks, Adrian thought it was a phase. He'd send her texts, pictures of sunsets, memories, inside jokes. She responded kindly, but never intimately. He told himself they had time. They always had time. Until one day, she stopped responding altogether. And Adrian, for the first time in his life, started to understand what it meant to be too late. It had been nearly 2 years since Clara had left his life, and Adrian had learned to bury the echo of her footsteps in the rhythm of routine. He still photographed sunsets, still drifted from one gig to another, still wore that crooked smile like a favorite jacket, even if it no longer fit the same way. His friends had stopped asking about Clara after a while. They knew better. He kept things light, surface level. New women came and went, each of them easy, breezy, beautifully temporary. There were no fights, no big conversations, no planning for a shared future. Just now, just pleasure, just distraction. Then he met Isabel. She was a graphic designer, 27, sharp, witty, as spontaneous as a thunderstorm. Adrian met her at a gallery launch downtown. She'd been wearing mismatched earrings and quoting Murakami. When he joked that he'd take her to the top of a parking garage to show her the best view of Verona, she didn't laugh. She just said, "Make sure it's north-facing. I like to see the wind." He was smitten. Isabel didn't ask him about the past. She didn't want to talk about 5 years from now. She liked mornings that started at noon and nights that ended at sunrise. With her, Adrian didn't have to explain himself. She didn't want to be built with, like Clara had. She wanted to float beside him, two comets colliding in the sky, burning bright and fast. And Adrian, still convincing himself he had moved on, thought this was what he wanted. The first time he called her his girlfriend was at a cozy Italian bistro on the edge of the city. He and Isabel had been seeing each other for 3 months. Some friends were meeting them there. He hadn't planned anything formal, but the vibe was right. It was casual. Harmless. The restaurant was buzzing with life that night. Jazz spilled from hidden speakers. Laughter bounced between tables. Adrian, wine in hand, was in his element, witty, charming, the storyteller at the table. Then he heard it. A voice. A name. "Adrian?" His spine stiffened before he turned. The air seemed to condense into a dense weight around his ribs. When he finally looked over his shoulder, he saw her. Clara. But not the Clara he remembered. This Clara stood poised in a tailored cream coat, confidence woven into her posture. Her hair was shorter now, sleek, neat, and her eyes had lost the lingering sadness he once knew. She looked luminous. And she wasn't alone. Next to her stood a man, tall, polished, calm. He carried himself with a quiet assurance, one hand resting gently on Clara's lower back. Protective. Intimate. Natural. Adrian's heart twisted, a slow, unrelenting ache blooming in his chest. Clara walked toward them with that same graceful gait he once traced barefoot in the morning light. "Wow! What a surprise," she said warmly, her smile genuine but measured. Adrian stood, struggling to keep his expression intact. Isabel glanced between them, sensing the tension but unsure of its source. Clara extended a hand toward her companion. "This is Marco. We're engaged." The word hit like a stone dropped in water. The ripple crashed through Adrian's body. Engaged. He barely managed a smile. "Congratulations. And this is Isabel," he added quickly, arm half raised toward the woman next to him, who was now sipping her wine with notable curiosity. "My girlfriend." There was a pause. Just long enough for the air between them to register the lie. Or was it a lie? The four of them exchanged pleasantries. Clara mentioned her firm's new office near the river. Marco said something about the house they were renovating outside the city. Adrian nodded, forced a joke, pretended he wasn't unraveling. When they said goodbye, Clara placed a hand briefly on Adrian's shoulder. "Take care, Adrian," she said softly. "Really?" He watched her walk away until the door closed behind her. The table fell into an awkward silence. Isabel raised an eyebrow. That was intense. Adrian exhaled and tried to summon his usual smirk. "Just an old chapter." Isabel leaned in. "You never mentioned a fiancé." "She wasn't," he said quickly. "We dated. That's all." But it wasn't. And they both knew it. Back at his apartment that night, Adrian couldn't sleep. He sat on the windowsill, feet perched on the fire escape, watching the dark city breathe. In the silence, memories slipped in like moonlight under a door. Clara at the farmer's market, choosing flowers for the living room. Clara dancing barefoot in his kitchen, singing off-key. Clara crying softly, asking him for a future he wasn't brave enough to promise. He thought of what she had now, Marco, stability, a home being built with 2 sets of hands. She had stopped waiting. She had built the life she wanted, with someone else. And it hurt more than he could explain. Isabel left the next morning. No fight. No dramatic goodbye. Just a quiet text that said, "You're still somewhere else. I hope you find your way back." Alone in his loft, Adrian finally understood something he'd avoided for years. Freedom without purpose wasn't living. It was floating. And no one could float forever. He opened a drawer and pulled out a dusty photo, Clara on his rooftop, smiling at a sunset, holding a cup of tea. The night they had watched the stars and she had asked him about the future. He'd said they had time. He now knew, time wasn't a river. It was a tide. And it had already gone out. 3 days after seeing Clara again, Adrian found himself back at the Overlook, the same spot where they had once watched fireworks on New Year's Eve, wrapped in one another, warm despite the January air. Now, the view looked the same, but he didn't. The city lights twinkled below like 1,000 chances never taken, and the drizzle that tapped against his coat felt oddly symbolic, like the sky offering its own apology. He stood alone, hands buried in his pockets, remembering the feeling of her fingers intertwined with his, the way she used to whisper dreams between silences. He had always been a man who said "we've got time." But now, standing in the present, that phrase felt like a haunting echo, mocking, hollow, final. His phone buzzed in his coat pocket. A message from his sister. "Coming to Mom's birthday dinner Friday? She misses you." He stared at the screen. Part of him wanted to reply. Part of him wanted to throw the phone into the rain. He hadn't been home in months. Family dinners reminded him too much of how still everyone else's life seemed, while his always floated somewhere between inspiration and avoidance. His sister had 2 kids and a husband who made pancakes on Sundays. His cousins had mortgages. Adrian had a cluttered loft, a camera bag, and a list of freelance clients that changed like the seasons. Still. He typed back, "I'll be there. Tell her I'll bring dessert." That Friday night, surrounded by birthday balloons and photos from decades past, Adrian realized something. He had been trying to outrun a version of himself he never understood. His mother hugged him a little tighter than usual. "You look tired, sweetheart," she said. "Are you okay?" He nodded, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. Later, as he stood at the kitchen sink rinsing wine glasses, his sister came up beside him. She handed him a dish towel, then asked quietly, "Was that really her? Clara?" He froze. "You saw the photo," he muttered. She gave him a gentle smile. "It wasn't the photo. It was your face." He wiped the same glass 3 times before speaking. "She's engaged. Looks happy. I didn't expect that to hit me so hard." His sister leaned against the counter. "You loved her. That's supposed to hurt. I didn't think she'd move on so completely." "You mean, you didn't think she'd stop waiting for you?" That made him flinch. But it was true. "I thought I was giving her freedom," he said defensively. "You were giving yourself excuses." They stood in silence, broken only by the clink of a glass placed on the counter. Finally, she spoke again. "It's not too late to grow up, Adrian. But it might be too late for her." The following week, Adrian did something he hadn't done in a long time. He printed photographs. Not for a gallery. Not for a client. Just for himself. Dozens of them: sunsets, street corners, coffee cups, train stations, rain against the window. But they all had something in common: Clara. Not her face, necessarily. But her presence. Her influence. He found himself organizing them, cataloging each by memory. The cafe she liked on rainy days. The park bench where she read that novel aloud to him. The ferry they missed because he insisted on watching just 5 more minutes of the sky. He wasn't making an album. He was confronting the life he never let happen. And in those images, he saw it clearly: his problem hadn't been fear of commitment. It was fear of accountability. Fear of saying, "Yes, I want this," and then being responsible if it broke. But wasn't it already broken? And hadn't he played the biggest part? One afternoon, as winter began peeling back to spring, Adrian walked into the bookstore Clara used to love. The bell above the door jingled like memory. He browsed without thinking: fiction, poetry, architecture, and then he saw it, a thin, hardcover photography book tucked between volumes on urban design. Found light, a visual journey through letting go. His heart stuttered. He pulled it out and flipped to the back cover. Author, Clara Mendoza. It was her. He stood frozen in place, fingers pressed to the pages, reading the blurb. Sometimes, the things we lose give us the clearest view of what we truly needed. He flipped through the pages. They weren't about him, not explicitly. But they were about her journey, about heartbreak, rediscovery, and the quiet power of rebuilding alone. A lump formed in his throat. He bought the book and walked out into the sunshine, heart hammering with something between pride and ache. She had told her story. And she had done it without needing him to explain the ending. That night, he sent her a message. "I read your book. It's beautiful. You are too. I never said thank you. Or I'm sorry. I'm saying both now." She didn't respond. Not that night. Not the next. But he hadn't written it to start something. He had written it to close something, honestly. Still, when her reply came 2 days later, it made his chest tighten. "Thank you, Adrian. I needed to write it. I hope you're well. I hope you're finding your own story too." And maybe that was enough. Spring unfolded slowly in the city, with shy bursts of green emerging through cracks in the sidewalks, and cherry blossoms dusting the park benches where Adrian now found himself spending most of his mornings. He still worked as a freelance photographer, but he had stopped chasing the frantic pace of back-to-back gigs. Instead, he began choosing projects that aligned with something deeper: emotion, story, purpose. It had been almost 3 months since he saw Clara again. 2 months since he read her book. 6 weeks since she'd replied to his message with grace he didn't deserve. And somewhere in the quiet between all that, something had shifted. He no longer woke up hoping for a message from her. He no longer stared at her old texts or scrolled through photos with a knot in his chest. What replaced that longing wasn't relief, not exactly. But it was peace. A small ember of it, still fragile, but growing. He had started writing again. Not to publish. Not even to show anyone. Just pages in a leather-bound journal, filled with reflections, memories, promises to himself. "I used to think freedom meant not answering to anyone," he wrote one morning, sitting on the stoop of his building with a coffee in hand. "But real freedom is choosing to show up, every day, for what matters." One rainy afternoon, Adrian was at a neighborhood gallery helping an old friend curate a photo exhibition called Rerouted. It featured artists who had changed careers or lifestyles after major personal upheavals: divorce, illness, bankruptcy, burnout. The gallery was small, but the stories were enormous. A woman who had walked away from a high-paying corporate job to open a plant shop. A man who rebuilt vintage bicycles after surviving a near-fatal accident. A couple who found each other in recovery and now painted abstract portraits of their former selves. As Adrian walked among the images, black and white and bleeding with emotion, he saw his own story mirrored in unexpected ways. He hadn't hit rock bottom. But he had coasted too long in a shallow life, thinking it was enough to smile and drift. He submitted a series called Spaces Between, A collection of quiet cityscapes and everyday moments, an unwashed teacup on a windowsill, an umbrella left behind on a subway bench, the warm glow of a bedroom lamp at dusk. They were not flashy. But they were honest. Intimate. The gallery curator called them unexpectedly tender. Adrian just called them his truth. Then came the call that changed everything. His sister, Rachel. Mom's cancer is back. He dropped the coffee mug he'd been holding. It shattered on the floor, a sharp echo of the words still hanging in the air. It's early, Rachel added quickly. The doctors are hopeful. But she'll need treatment. Surgery, then chemo. Adrian sat in silence. I think she'll need us around a lot more. He nodded, even though she couldn't see it. I'm here, he said. I'll be there. And he was. Over the next few weeks, Adrian became a fixture at his mother's apartment. He cooked. He cleaned. He took her to appointments, cracked jokes during long hours in the waiting room, and learned to prepare smoothies with spinach and ginger, two things he once couldn't stand. In caring for her, he discovered a tenderness in himself he hadn't accessed in years. One afternoon, as he brushed her thinning hair into a low bun, she looked at him in the mirror and said, "You've changed, Adrian." He paused. "For better, I hope." She smiled. "For real." On a quiet Sunday, Rachel invited him over for dinner. Her kids had drawn pictures of Uncle A in capes and silly hats, and he spent the evening helping them build a blanket fort in the living room while his sister watched with watery eyes. "You're becoming the man Laura always hoped you'd be," she said gently as they washed dishes later. "I know," Adrian replied. "But too late." Rachel looked at him. "Maybe. Maybe not. But you are becoming that man for you now. And that's what matters." As summer stretched its arms over the city, Adrian found himself on the other side of something. He hadn't expected healing to be so quiet. So unglamorous. It came not in grand declarations or dramatic gestures, but in morning routines and long walks and learning to be present, even when things were hard. He started mentoring younger photographers, volunteering at the Community Arts Center, and taking his niece and nephew to the Science Museum every other Saturday. He even planted a small herb garden on his windowsill. But it wasn't just about doing more. It was about being more intentional, more grounded, more aware of how he moved through the world and what he left behind in people's hearts. He no longer believed in "we have time." He believed in now. One August evening, as he left the Arts Center after a mentorship session, he ran into a familiar face outside, a woman with auburn curls, a soft smile, and a stack of music books in her arms. It wasn't Clara. Her name was Elise. They started talking. She taught piano to kids with learning disabilities. She loved jazz but hated olives. She once lived in a van for 6 months just to see the coast. And she thought Adrian's laugh sounded like someone exhaling relief. They didn't fall in love that night. But something clicked, easy, honest, unforced. They exchanged numbers. He didn't make her wait 5 days to call. He didn't pretend he wasn't interested. And when he asked her out, he didn't say "we've got time." He said, "How about Tuesday?" And Elise said yes. By October, the days were shorter, the wind sharper, and Adrian's world, unexpectedly, felt warmer. He and Elise had been seeing each other steadily for 2 months now. Not in a whirlwind way, but in that steady rhythm of two people who had learned the value of patience. She was nothing like Clara. And that was good. She didn't challenge him in the same fierce, world-shaking way, but instead invited him into calm, into stillness. And Adrian, who once chased chaos like a moth to flame, now found that irresistible. They cooked together on Fridays. Grocery shopped together on Sundays. On Wednesdays, she taught piano until late, and he'd wait outside the music school with 2 cups of tea. Their relationship wasn't a spark that lit a fire. It was a soft ember that never stopped glowing. And yet, even in this peace, there were remnants of the past. One day, Elise found the book Clara had written, Where the Wind Used to Live. It was dog-eared, with notes in the margins, some of them circled with small stars, others underlined twice. A relic from a time Adrian had tried not to erase, but also not to glorify. "Is this hers?" Elise asked gently, holding the book like something sacred. He nodded. Yeah. You still read it? Sometimes. Less than before. He hesitated, then added, it changed me. She didn't ask for details. Didn't press. She just nodded and placed the book carefully back on the shelf, between a travelogue and a poetry collection. That night, she simply said, I like the man you are now. And I trust the story that made you. Adrian didn't cry, but he came close. In late November, a letter arrived. Handwritten. No return address. He knew the handwriting instantly. Clara. It had been almost 6 months since they'd last spoken, since that long, soft conversation where they agreed not to reopen what had finally closed cleanly. The letter was short. Precise. But it hit with quiet force. Dear Adrian. I saw your photo series in the rerouted gallery. Someone sent me the article. I didn't expect to feel what I felt when I saw your name. A strange cocktail of sadness, warmth, pride, and peace. You're becoming the man I hoped you'd be. Not for me. For you. And I mean that without bitterness. Truly. I'm getting married in the spring. His name is Elias. He's a writer too, though much quieter than I am. I think you'd like him. I hope you're well, Adrian. I hope you're loved. I hope you never stop chasing the light, not the kind that blinds, but the kind that guides. With care. Clara. Adrian folded the letter slowly and set it on the kitchen counter. His fingers lingered on the paper longer than they needed to. He didn't cry. But something deep inside him, the last lingering echo of what had been, finally exhaled. He whispered her name like a goodbye, not of grief, but of grace. Winter brought snow earlier than usual. Elise loved snow. She'd pull Adrian into the street the moment the first flakes fell, dragging him into slow dances under the streetlights, laughter echoing off the cold brick walls. One night, after they had made soup and listened to old jazz records, she looked at him across the table and said, Do you think people only get one great love? Adrian thought of Clara's letter. Of the 5 years that had shaped him. Of how hard he had once held on to the idea of the one. No, he said, setting his spoon down. I think we get many chances to love deeply, if we're brave enough to learn from the first time we get it wrong. She nodded. Then reached across the table, palm up. He took her hand. In January, Adrian's grandmother passed away quietly in her sleep. Beatrice had been his anchor. His moral compass. The woman who once scolded him for running away from every good thing that didn't come easy. At her funeral, surrounded by family and memories, Adrian read a short eulogy. I used to think love had to be loud, he said, voice steady. But Beatrice showed me love could be quiet. Constant. Steady like a song you don't notice until you miss it. Afterwards, Elise stood by him without words. Just her hand in his. And for the first time in his adult life, Adrian didn't feel like he had to run or entertain or be anything more than simply there. He felt held. On a crisp afternoon in March, Elise's niece turned 8. There was a party, complete with pink balloons, way too much sugar, and the chaos of children playing tag in the yard. Adrian helped frost cupcakes, despite being terrible at it, and found himself with blue icing on his nose as the kids declared him most likely to start a cupcake fight. It was chaotic. It was loud. And it was beautiful. Later, as the sun set, Elise found him alone on the porch, staring out at the golden horizon. You okay? She asked. He nodded. I'm happy. She smiled. You say that like you're still surprised. He laughed. I am. A little. I spent so long being afraid of stillness. Afraid of being enough. Of someone staying. She leaned against him. And now? He looked at her. Now I think I want to stay, too. On the first day of spring, they planted a lemon tree in a pot on the windowsill of their shared apartment. Not because it was easy to grow. Not because it was guaranteed to bear fruit. But because it would take time. Care. Attention. Just like us, Elise joked. Adrian pressed a kiss to her forehead. No, he said. Better.